Hello, and welcome to the AI Decision Maker Summit. My name is Nick with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. A couple of things before I turn things over to our panel moderator. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page, which include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. To ask questions throughout the session, simply type into the Q&A chat, and we will address your questions at the end of the session. Now, without further delay, I would like to introduce our moderator, Ashok Manthena, AI strategist and author. We're really excited to have Ashok and our panelists for a panel discussion titled Ethical Considerations for AI Implementations. Welcome, Ashok. Over to you.
Thanks, Nick. Welcome, everyone. I'm Ashok Manthena. I've been working in AI for the last 4 or 5 years, trying to help finance users use AI and alleviate all their pain points. So I always think how I can use AI from a customer point of view, but this question keeps coming, which is AI ethics, right? That comes from the customers, that comes from the people I interact with, and when I show them all the use cases, they say, how about AI ethics? How about the privacy? How about the bias? So today, we have this amazing panel with us who can give us a lot of insights about what's happening in 2024 about AI ethics and what happened in 2023. And let's go around the room for a quick introduction. Deniz, you want to go first?
Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Deniz Johnson. I'm the CEO of Stratify. We are leading AI company on responsible AI, specifically addressing bias detection and mitigation in AI, as well as difficult to address problems in credit risk decisioning and fraud detection.
Rakesh.
Hi, my name is Rakesh Sharma. I lead data and AI practice here at Kyndryl. If you do not know Kyndryl, it's a company which spun out of IBM about 2 years ago. The whole technology services unit of IBM, right? About 30% of IBM. That is the new Kyndryl now. And we service, around 4,500 customers across the globe. I particularly lead our data and AI practice, focus on financial markets. I've held product roles, growth roles, data leadership roles in my prior roles. My latest stint before coming to Kyndryl was leading a Fintech where I led the product and growth teams. Happy to be here.
Right. Sergio?
Yes, my name is Sergio Mastrogiovanni. I am professor and researcher on artificial intelligence and smart cities. I teach at NYU and other universities, and I'm also a practitioner. I advise these topics to governments and also startups. Happy to be here and look forward for this very interesting conversation.
Smita?
Hi, everyone. I'm Smita Rajmohan. I'm Senior Product Counsel at Autodesk, which is one of the companies that leads in construction and design and manufacturing software. I lead legal support for AI operations, artificial intelligence governance, and launching products responsibly using AI. Prior to this, I worked at Apple, where I was also product counsel. I supported iPads and a lot of other hardware products in special projects. So I'm the lawyer on this panel and very excited to talk about ethical issues in AI. Thank you for having me.
Right. Thanks, everyone. So let's start with this, right? What are the biggest ethical considerations surrounding AI right now? And everyone is thinking, right, how can organizations ensure they're up to date on this? Smita, you want to take this question?
Sure. So, ethics is interesting. I sometimes think about it as soft law. There are those issues which we know there's a right thing to do and maybe a wrong thing to do, but maybe the laws haven't quite caught up to the technology or quite caught up to the harms and the risks that need to be mitigated. So ethics takes that shape and form and fills that gap where we know that there's something weird about this issue and we need to do something about it. And this is where customers can think about setting out their ethical principles, the way they want to work, the way they want to do business, and it can be, it can fill that gap where customers feel like they can trust your company because you are thinking about these issues around AI mindfully. So some of the issues really, I think you sort of raised, Ashok, in your introduction, are around bias, right? So if you think about bias, a real world example of that would be if you're using AI for recruitment and hiring. That's clearly an example of where bias could really interfere in making an equitable, in coming to an equitable result. Similar to that, like if you think about facial recognition, very recently the FTC sort of hauled up this company called Rite Aid, which was using facial recognition technology in its stores, and it was flagging people that it thought might be likely to shoplift or had shoplifted in the past. And so Rite Aid's employees were going around following these potential shoplifters and accusing them very audibly in the public of their intention to shoplift. And guess what? It got a lot. It was based on a lot of false positives, and Black, Brown, Latino people were unfairly targeted as a result of this. Clearly an ethical issue, potentially also a legal issue, right? Because of discrimination laws. But I think these are just some of the examples where ethics comes into play.
I would like to add to Smita, when we're talking about ethics, and we have to immediately think about how do you, from a customer perspective, how do you explain your decisions to your customers? How are you able to explain what your systems are, what your solutions are doing to your auditors, to your regulators, as Smita mentioned? From a regulatory perspective, these are crucial to make sure that you're implementing the technologies that are fair and account for bias, but from the explainability, the transparency, the ability to understand and expose the logic behind your decisions comes to the basis of this conversation, the ethics conversation, I would say.
Just to add another thing, right? We all have seen there's a lot of positive, thought process around AI, Gen AI, but equal amount people are perceiving it negatively as well, right? It is for the companies, it is for the organizations to change that perception if they want to use it in a responsible manner, right? I think that perception management is also very, very important in your brand management. Customers like to work with brands they trust. How do you build that trust, right? I think ethically operating technology, making sure that it is equitable, transparent, and fair, that creates that brand trust. So it is not only, say, legally or ethically required, it is also required to make sure that your business runs at its optimum, and then you are, getting ahead of your competitors. More transparent, more fair you behave in public perception, you remove that fear what public has about your use of AI, Gen AI technologies to mitigate those, say, fallouts of some of these things. In example of Rite Aid, what Smita gave, that was a great example, right? Imagine that they had done it a little bit differently, remove those false positive, have human in the loop, and implemented that ethically, right? It would have made their stores safer and would also have, the larger public respect that company, that they're making the store safer for everyone in general, right? So yes, the technology deployment at Rite Aid was great, but I think it was not fully done, using the responsible AI framework, or not fully taking care of the concerns of larger public.
Yeah, you raise a very interesting point because we are far behind laws and everything that is happening, but we grew up believing or thinking that our data is not ours, right? That Google is the owner of the data, Facebook is the owner of our faces, our picture, our data. Same with all these big techs. And we are living a change of paradigm these days. We are talking about AI, but blockchain brings a very interesting, framework where we can talk about decentralized technology and we can talk about having or not having owners of the data, right? We are talking about how they own our data, but also how our play and our train our models with someone else's data, someone else's name, someone else's reputation, right? So we need to start understanding that that cannot be or cannot keep happening, right?
That's right. I think this kind of discussion happens for every new technology breakthrough, right? It would have happened when computers were invented, right? Automation, industrial revolution. But now I think we are at a stage where we have this new technology and we know how to explore it for various use cases, but we still haven't had any solid framework, either from the industry or from the governments or the regulatory bodies at this point of time, right? So, Deniz, how can we ensure that AI is used? Because we don't have this framework at this point of time, right? So this is for organizations. How can we ensure that AI is used in much more fairer, unbiased, and transparent way, especially when we are making it to allow all these self decisions, right?
So very good question. Let me frame it a little bit. I always say that not all AI is created equally. So you really have to understand what your business problem that you're solving. So I'm going really to the basics, because in my eyes, AI is just another tool in your tool belt. And there will be opportunities where, and there are use cases where neural networks or black box is more than sufficient for what you're trying to do. But if you're dealing with important decisions that are going to impact people's lives, we're in the business of providing credit risk decisioning for underwriters, for lenders, so that you can expand to underrepresented groups, underrepresented communities. That's one of the missions of our company. So there, you have to be transparent. And when I say transparent, it needs to be understandable by humans, and human needs to be in the loop. And that's very, very important, because you can't delegate decisions that are so important to the machine only. And if you're, the recent example is the Navy Credit Union, which has been just fine for lending, for delegating their lending decisions to fully automated manner, and without enough supervision. And that's where the transparency, that unique transparency, is incredibly important. Bias is a social concept. Bias, what was acceptable in the past is not acceptable in the future. And we have to be really focused on understanding, as we move forward, as our demographics change and what's acceptable changes, that we do not repeat the mistakes of our past and just make them rigid guidelines for our future. And to be able to do that, you really need to have human in the loop, because if machine predicts what it's learned from the past, and if we're trying to change the future, you really need to have the human in the loop. So I see one of the key things is to make sure that you have this machine and human working in tandem, and their interpretability is going to be much more important. Understanding what the machine is doing. I am saying not explainable, but interpretable, human understandable.
No, I think great points, Denise. Couple of other things what we have seen now, it's so easier to generate synthetic data, right? As you pointed out, that we have had issues of bias, we have had issues of being unfair in the past, and that is the data we have. And our new models and systems are learning from that, and that's why they produce the output, which also is biased. What we need to do here is we need to create the data much more balanced. So the data we have, add some of the synthetic data to it to make it more balanced, more diverse, to and then that creates the learning platform for the AI models, which now it's learning from an equitable space. So the outputs will be much more equitable, much more fair versus otherwise. So use of synthetic data is one avenue to do that. Another thing is there are testing methodology which test AI outputs for bias, and then they give you mitigation guidelines, right? Deploy those. There are also committees, what kind of AI governance boards companies are creating, and you should have one in your organizations, which goes and reviews some of these models built. When an AI model goes into production, somebody has to review that on some of these principles, if the data scientist or the AI developer adhere to those or not, whether the data was cleansed enough or not. And then have regular testing cadence to make sure that it is still performing to its optimum, where the developers and the business leader think that they thought they designed it for, right? Because again, some of these things, they happen on its own. The neural network works on its own. So that frequent testing or regular testing, that's important. And finally, and Denise, I 100% agree with you on the human in the loop thing, right? Because whenever an AI model takes adverse decision against a customer, you want that reviewed by a human. And that is what, would remove some of these fallouts. Say, for example, a credit decision gets denied for a minority community or a disadvantaged community in the past. Have that reviewed, do not let that decision go to the actual, customer, get that human, and then they can maybe take another cognizant effect and make it right, maybe, right? That goes back in the feedback loop of the model. And those are some of the steps people can take to make sure that what they're deploying in productions is much more fair, much more responsible.
And I will add to what you said, Rakesh. We are working with a group called Underwriting for Racial Justice. We are the technology partner for 20 financial institutions, including CDFIs and banks. And this group is looking at their underwriting criteria. They cannot, in financial services, which is where we work in, creating the synthetic data, not everybody would be able to have the resources to do so.
Right.
So understanding what is really driving what components of data is driving your decisioning is incredibly important. And that right there, being understandable by humans is that transparency becomes even more important. And then really looking at what components, because you can't trust something like FICO when the decisioning is not, it has been biased in the past. You really need to look at what other things really impact your decisions and should be impacting it even more as you really look at more fair lending as we move forward.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
I'll just add, I think some of the things that you all mentioned, and like if I were to put it in some terms of like takeaways, I think model monitoring and human feedback, I want to make sure that doesn't get lost in all of the good things you guys were saying. I think that's very important. I also think it's important to have people in the room that are not just technical, right? I think that's, again, something that you both mentioned, which I think needs to get called out, is that you need to have someone who is maybe from the social sciences field who would understand biases better than maybe someone who is knee-deep in AI and understands AI really well. So you need that governance board that you have needs to have stakeholders from all across the company and from all across, it needs to be diverse in terms of geography, gender, perspectives, so that the folks that are in charge of making the decisions about AI are also sort of listening to all of the arguments in favor and against. And then lastly, like on transparency as well, like I just want to call out that there are laws that are forming around automated decision making, just because we're on this point. And especially like in California, there's a proposed law, for example, where I'm from. And some of these actually require you to, they require you to tell the consumer, this has been, an automated decision, and potentially even give them an option to understand how the decision was made, and maybe give them an opt-out of that framework if they so choose. So those laws are also coming down the pipeline. So on top of just thinking about, is this fair, and all that, you may need to think about what the risks are with doing something like that.
Yeah, I would add, we need to have, of course, governance, but also regular audits to our models, because if not, we are going to keep repeating, because this is cultural, right? If we hire Black or white straight men in our history, we are going to keep doing that because our models is going to watch our history and keep repeating that. So the worst case scenario is where we are having unconscious bias, right? So we need to understand which are the hidden points and be aware of that, right?
Right. I just want to, just an observation, I just want to bring a perspective of the realistic nature of the testing, right? If we take driverless cars, even after all these years that we have seen all these driverless cars around, there's still some edge cases that comes every day for them, right? Some sharp turn where there is no test data for that kind of a turn. Now, the trained model needs to make a decision how to make that kind of a turn, right? Those kind of edge cases are going to be there in all kinds of AI use cases, and probably the builders, the vendors who are building this software, they need to test for all this, but still there will be some edge cases that will be left for the users to find out and then later fix it, right? So there is an evolution of AI that is happening right now, but we're still, I think, at a starting point. We still have to go a long way to cover a lot of edge cases, and then also, meanwhile, evolve our ethics theory as well, right? How do we get these edge cases as part of this AI? I don't think it's going to happen on day one, but eventually, I think as a human race, we'll figure out what are the best frameworks that we can start, or what government should start regulating different kinds of AI, and that will happen pretty soon in the future. But don't expect that to happen on day one. And now pivoting to, in terms of regulations and standards, and that's the question a lot of people are asking on the chat as well. What are the regulation standards, compliance requirements right now in place for AI? Do we have any internationally recognized standards before we implement AI?
So I have good news and I have good news and bad news. The good news is we do have laws that discuss AI harms. The bad news is there cannot be one specific law that covers all of AI. So you can't just think about, even if there's AI in the name of the statute, unfortunately, just compliance with that one law is not going to guarantee that you don't get sued for anything you do around AI. Because AI is a technology, it's a way of computing, it's a way of decision making. It has so many different facets. So that it can cause different outcomes and therefore can cause different harms. So, and I've been looking at the questions in the chat. My advice would be to, when you're thinking about governance, is to think about a risk-based and harms-based approach. Instead of just looking at laws and reading through it and seeing if you can comply with all of the subsections, think of what is our business model? What is the outcome? Not just the outputs that we're producing. What is the potential outcome of the outputs that we're producing? What are the downstream effects? And what kind of legal harms could we be potentially causing that would make us culpable for any sort of violation or liability? And to that end, you could be looking at tort laws. So you, depending on what your business model is, you could be liable for defamation, right? If, for example, your business is OpenAI and ChatGPT says something incorrectly about someone, says you're going, you serve time in jail and, you're a very law-abiding citizen, you may take offense and file for defamation. You might be responsible for product liability claims. Let's say your AI made a mistake in reporting some very important safety metric, which caused the collapse of something and resulted in harm to individuals. So you could be liable from a product liability perspective. Everyone is talking about the New York Times complaint to OpenAI. That's really an emerging issue, which around whether or not copyrighted content should be used to train AI models, and whether that's copyright infringement. There's also an ethical issue there about, even if it's not copyright infringement, how do we make sure that human creativity is preserved? How do we compensate these good folks that have, these artists that have come up with something truly original, and when their work is used for creating something else? So there's definitely that question, and you may need to be thinking about IP laws depending on what your use case is. And then, data privacy, I think, Ashok, you mentioned that initially as well. You do want to make sure that, you're not ingesting personal information and using that to train a model without the right notice and consent requirements. And then the output isn't producing or leaking anything it's been trained on. And if that output contains leaked PII, that's obviously also an issue. The FTC also just came out with a statement warning these model as a service companies, telling them that if they are making any statements around data privacy and security, they do need to abide by those commitments. So data privacy and security, definitely a huge focus for folks thinking about indulging in sort of AI activity. And then, of course, everyone has probably heard about the European Union AI Act, which has been passed. We're still waiting to see the full text, but that again has gone on a risk-based approach, and it thinks about AI in terms of unacceptable risk, limited risk, and low to minimal risk. So, and of course high risk. So it's really interesting to look at laws that maybe other jurisdictions are passing, because oftentimes we all borrow from each other. So even if you're not doing any business that's impacting EU residents, it's worth taking a look at that to see how regulators in general are thinking about AI and these issues. So yeah, there's a lot. Like I said, unfortunately, there's no one quick way of getting to compliance.
Well, I think just to add to what Smita said here, right? I think those are great points. You want to make sure that you're adhering to things which are current, and then there are laws which are in making, right? So think what is the right thing to do, because ultimately the regulators, the governments will make those things into laws. So be prepared ahead of time. And again, it's a good thing to do that for your own business and for your own customer. Do the right thing. Second thing is, let's not forget about the data privacy laws. There are laws around data privacy all across, right? all the AI models, they still go and ingest the data, make sure that you have the rights to the data, and then the people whose data you're using, they know that you're using it for the purpose. Because that can, as Smita said, that the AI models and nowadays Gen AI model, I think one of the biggest risks Gen AI models are they're hallucinating and they're producing sometimes just false, and sometimes they just leak things which they're not supposed to, right? So look at all those data privacy laws. Have a really strong data governance body in your organization. Choose a data governance framework, tailor it to your organization, make sure that that is looking at all your data practices and also looking at all your AI practices.
Deniz, you want to add something in terms of compliance requirements, standards?
I'm going to take us a little bit a step out for just a second. While there's not clear black and white rules and regulations, you need to look at what is there. And as Smita and Rakesh already said, data privacy is pretty much there for every country jurisdiction. But if you're looking for guidance on guidelines for AI methodologies, from an ethical perspective, I actually would recommend Singapore. Singapore has a 5-step. They're the first ones to create this. They created a 5-step methodology of how to build AI models more ethically. That was then adapted, as Smita said, we all borrow from each other. Then UK provided a guidelines for that, and that became adapted and adopted by a number of countries in EU. For US, we have high-level guidelines. We're a member of an organization called I'm drawing blank right now.
Is it the CFPP?
So regulators are very, very active right now, and they're meeting with different groups to understand what ethical AI, and responsible AI could be. If you notice, CFPP only have been hiring data scientists the last year and a half. So all of the stuff that's happening in EU is going to come over to us. We have a number of regulations in the pipeline that's being discussed right now at different stages of discussion. So we're actually going to see a lot more guidance. It might not be, as Smita said, not everything will be in the time that we would like as the practitioners to receive, but definitely there's a lot of advocacy groups that are very active on this as well. So from that perspective, stay tuned. It's coming.
2023 is all about a lot of buzz that happened with generative AI, right? We have ChatGPT, and then enterprises started thinking about how can we use AI. But I think 2024 is where the solid implementations and the projects are going to start. Sergio, do you have any thoughts on how leaders can successfully communicate the importance of AI ethics to their team?
Yes, I would say first we need to acknowledge we are using AI, because AI is not just GPT. AI, we are using and we are doing AI, even if we are aware of that or not. So we need to understand what we do, what we fellow employees do, and what our company is doing with AI. So that is the first step. Then we need to communicate and make audits to the data that we use and how we train and how we use these models. And then we need to have everyone on board, right? Because we have this explosion, as you mentioned last year. Exactly 1 year ago, Microsoft was acquiring OpenAI, and we had this arm race, because even though we had this large language model for years, last year was the explosion where everyone would access to these models, everyone would be publishing content using these models, even our employees, and sometimes on our behalf, our employees would be doing that. So we need to be very aware of that. We need to have governance committees, having everyone on board, and being aware of this unconscious bias that we all have, right? So talking about compliance, operational, reputational, and finally regulatory risk that we all have in our companies, right? So we need to embrace the chaos, embrace the mess, and start working on that.
Right. I'll just pivot to the questions and we'll come back to some of our other questions. A lot of people have been asking, what are the best resources to even understand these frameworks? Are there any frameworks? I know Smita said there is no one law or one framework that will be applied for all AI. I think that we all need to understand that there's not going to be one framework that can be applied to, let's say, generative AI versus machine vision versus the data science, right? There's going to be different frameworks, different laws that's going to go apply. But do you guys have any resources that you can share?
So there are a couple of publications, IAP and CSIS, right? They do track all the regulations around AI, around the application of AI. And as Smita said, that we cannot fully regulate AI because AI is not something you regulate. AI is a tool, a method to go do something, right? So the regulators will regulate that what we are trying to do, like for credit decisioning, as Deniz said, that you have to tell that this decision was taken by an AI system. So there will be more and more things which AI will generate and do. So regulators will always play catch up. But I think go read these publications, go talk to people in your legal group, go talk to people in your risk and compliance group, right? There are companies who have advocacy and diversity groups. Go talk to those people and they will guide you what is the right thing to do, what you should be doing, what you should not be doing. And last but not least, go talk to your marketing folks. They know the human aspect of your consumers and customers. If they think that that's a message which is okay to send out to the market, yeah, sure, right? So some of these groups which are non-technology groups, they will help, shaping that mindset, what needs to be done and what needs to be held back.
I will say there's a NIST which is our National Institute of Standards and Technologies, has released an AI risk management framework, which might be a handy tool to map risk. So it talks about mapping and measuring and all of that, and might be something that you want to consider. Also, I wouldn't get overwhelmed by all of it. It's possible if you're not actually developing any foundational models or doing anything on your own, and you are just wanting to bring in AI technologies, I think you can be very strategic about asking the right questions of your vendors. Can go a really long way in mitigating risk for you. So try and find out what is the industry standard for what you should ask for in your contract with a vendor that is claiming to provide AI technologies to you, and how they're going to use your data for ML training, what data security privacy standards they have. So I think all of this can also be one way in which you can start to really dabble in AI if you haven't yet, and do that in a way in which you learn gradually about what it is and how it can help your company.
Right. Great point. I mean, we all think that this whole discussion is about curbing the innovation of AI or regulating it, right? But it's more about balancing the innovation versus with all the ethics, compliance, and regulations. Deniz, you want to add something?
I wanted to add, AI is not something that we're going to, not use as we move forward to be able to be competitive, to be able to keep up with the innovation that's happening in the industry, whichever industry you're in. It's a great tool for digital transformation, for efficiency, for scalability, changing the way you do business. So I'm going to go back to the comment I made. Not all AI is created equally. You need to know where you need the ethical, where you need to address the ethical concerns and where a black box is fine. Anything that you are going to deal with hard decisions decisions that are impacting human lives, the interpretability is going to be the key to be able to answer the questions that Smita just outlined. Because if you are understanding and it has that level of transparency, it's just a conversation around what's the risk of doing this, implementing this technology.
Someone asked this very interesting question. I would like to hear the answer from you guys. Is AI capable of getting around any regulations on its own? Rakesh, you want to answer that question?
So not today, right? I think we are still far away from general AI, right? I think all the AI technologies and solutions we have today, they're still artificial, right? They're nowhere close to general intelligence. I think we are still 5 to 10 years old. And I hope that it does not get there where it is creating its own paths. I think we have to be very ready as a society to adopt that level of AI. So I don't think that answer to that is yes today, but who knows in 5 to 10 years. I mean, I speak to some of the research scientists in some of the universities. They think it's 5 years, could be 10.
Or could be tomorrow.
So I think not tomorrow, right?
Okay.
It will be a really hard thing. I think we had LLMs all 2023. We are starting to see some LAMs now, right? I think 2024 we would see a lot of LAMs. They could do some of that, but I think it's very, very beginning of LAMs. I think it has become very easy to create newer things. AI creating own AI, right? So 5 years is still kind of doable. We could see some natural human equivalent of things running in 5 years, but I hope that they don't go and overturn regulations.
That's right.
We are going to see that part though in a couple of years. So this is not science fiction, right?
Right.
We are close to Skynet.
That's right. To quickly wrap up, one last, take 10-15 seconds to answer this question is, how do you see AI continuing to grow its full potential in this 2024, right? I will start with Deniz.
I think as you look at 2024, I'm going to actually divide it into two things. One is because every conversation I had about AI has turned into Gen AI. So in the last 6 months, so if you're talking about Gen AI, we're on the hype cycle. It's really being hyped, but a good use case has not been really identified. It gives you responses, it predicts responses with great confidence that could appear that a human it's a human like way, but that doesn't change the fact that it is only predicting what it has been fed, and it hasn't been fed everything. So I consider Gen AI in its hype and not yet useful for 2024, with a lot of use cases being experimented. But when I look at more predictive machine learning solutions, I think it is a conversation around, it's not whether if you're going to implement it, how you're going to implement it is more like it in 2024, because to be able to be competitive, you need the capability, scalability, efficiency that the AI is giving you. And the future is where these predictive products are. So it's I am expecting to see much more businesses really looking at how to implement this.
Right. Rakesh, you talk to a lot of enterprises. What's your thoughts on it?
So I think I agree with Deniz, right? It's definitely in hype cycle. I go talk to customers. They want to do Gen AI. They don't know what to do with it, right?
Right.
So they just want to do Gen AI somehow and throw some problem at it. I think, but what I've seen, that is what was all last year, right? We are doing some pilots. We are doing some of that work. We are definitely starting to see some real use cases come up, right? Now, if you notice that all of these companies, say Microsoft, Google, they have introduced Copilot, for easier. I think what is happening is, as is, it's not solving a lot of things today. But what it is doing, it is adding to the productivity of your everyday employee, right? Now you can create content faster, you can email faster. Now in Teams, that takes notes for you. Zoom takes notes for you, right?
That's
All
right.
that work is now handled by AI for you, right?
That's right.
So that is what is Gen AI. But another thing what Gen AI has done is it has enabled the production of AI models. I was talking about synthetic data earlier, and Deniz rightly pointed out that's very expensive to do, not possible for a lot of companies. But with Gen AI, that has become much more reachable now, right? A lot of companies can go work on that synthetic. So I think this year we would see another hype about LAMs. What was LLM last year, right? So that would be the hype. But in terms of the conversation, you would see LLMs doing a lot of work. You have Code Whisperer now, right? You can write code faster. You can write things faster. I think you will see a productivity jump. I was reading an article earlier. So it looks like Bill Gates and some of those leaders, they're saying that we could see productivity gains of, 30, 40% this year alone.
Right.
A lot of AI, and by the way, AI is 50 plus years old, right? Not a lot of people recognize that, but we have been doing AI for 50 plus years. A lot of things have helped gain productivity in blue collar. I think this is something which will gain productivity in white collar.
Great. We are out of time, but thanks everyone for joining and all for your insights as well. Over to you, Nick.
Well, thank you again. This was such an incredible panel. And I want to thank everyone else for joining us today. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. This officially concludes the Argyle AI Decision Maker Summit. Thank you again for joining us today and engaging in our content. Have a great rest of your day.